Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, it isn't often that we take it upon ourselves to amend the Constitution of the state of Illinois. When we do it with as much seriousness as we can muster because it is an important document clearly for the state. What I bring to you today, HJRCA29, is an important endeavor. It deals with the rights of victims of violent crime. This resolution amends the Illinois Constitution to ensure that there is a remedy for violations of the rights victims have already had under Illinois law for over 25 years. Just as an offender has a remedy when their constitutional or statutory rights are violated, so should a victim of violent crime. They've had rights under the law for years. This constitutional amendment will confer upon them actionable rights and enforceable rights. This amendment expands and clarifies the rights of crime victims to provide them with greater access to post-trial proceedings, greater knowledge of proceedings and events that may affect their safety or their rights, timely action on their requests, and the ability to appeal decisions that affect the exercise of their personal rights. The first movement on this type of action came in the state of California, and this amendment today is named Marsy's Law. Marsy's Law came about as Marcy Nicholas, a California college student who was stalked and killed by her ex-boyfriend. A week after she was murdered, Marcy's mother walked into a grocery store after visiting her daughter's grave and was confronted by the accused murderer. She had no idea that this murderer had been released on bail. This story is typical of the pain and suffering that family members of murder victims and victims of violent crime have endured. She was not informed because the courts and law enforcement, though well-meaning, had no obligation to keep her informed. HJRCA29 will remedy that in the state of Illinois and will give the family members of the victims of violent crime the ability to protect themselves, the ability to go into a courtroom, the ability to be advised of all proceedings that will affect their lives. I'm gratified that 80 plus of you have signed on as co-sponsors of this constitutional amendment. It's an important amendment for our Constitution. And before I go further, I want to thank the many in the gallery wearing T-shirts and others around the state that have worked so long and so hard to get us to this day today. Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of this constitutional amendment.
You've heard the gentleman's explanation. Is there any discussion? Representative Biss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank the sponsor for bringing this important matter before us, and it's one that I support with enthusiasm. But I also wanted to thank one other individual who has been my teacher on this subject, is a constituent of mine who is in the gallery, Jennifer Bishop Jenkins. She is someone who is able to turn heart-wrenching personal tragedy in her own life into a life's mission of improving conditions regarding violent crime in Illinois and creating a set of rights and opportunities for relatives of victims. And I simply want to thank her for her advocacy, and I well know that we would not be taking this vote today if it were not for that advocacy. Thank you very much.
Representative Rebeletti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative Lang, what type of, you were saying that there would be some type of consequences if some of these portions of the amendment weren't followed. What would those consequences be?
The victim's family would be able to go into a courtroom and ask the judge to enforce their rights and, in some cases, stop the proceedings while they were able to provide, for instance, a victim impact statement and that type of thing.
So they would be able to come in on their own motion then, maybe with counsel,
That's correct,
other
sir.
than the state's attorney's office or whomever?
That is correct, sir.
To the constitutional amendment, ladies and gentlemen, it is high time that we put this in our Constitution. The gravity of these issues is dealt with every day in the 102 courthouses across the state. Having been in those courtrooms and advocated for victims in Will County, I understand how difficult it is to be part of that process, how the victims can easily be intimidated by the gravity of the situation, by the fear of retribution, by the difficulty of losing a loved one and not exactly sure what happens next. While I'm fully aware that assistant state's attorneys across the state do everything that they possibly can to accommodate this, we want to make sure that it is the law of this state, it is a part of our Constitution, that they will be able to be a part of the process and afford the same due process and notice provisions that defendants would have, to be a part of the process from the start of the court proceedings, to be able to advocate on behalf of their loved ones at a bond hearing, to discuss the amount of fear they may have of what could happen to them if they testify on behalf of their family or of themselves, what the collateral damage is to their family, and to make sure that the court is fully aware of all the circumstances of the case, not only read by an assistant state's attorney, but of the family themselves, and to have some type of relief if they feel that there has been something wrong throughout the proceedings. I think it's important that the victim is as intricate of the process as any other participant, because the last thing that we want to do in our court system is re-victimize the victim. We want to make sure that we seek justice for them, that there is some type of remuneration for them, whatever that amount may be, and that they can continue on in our communities, being safe and trying to move forward past terrible tragedy and situations. So with that, I commend the sponsor for his hard work. I know this is something that has taken years to come to fruition, and I would urge an aye vote.
Representative Rosemary Mulligan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative, as many of the people who have been here for a while know, my father was a murder victim. And of the 5 young men that murdered them, 3 of them went to prison for 22 years. At the end of 11 years, advocates for the criminals who were eligible to get out at that point started calling my mother in order to keep her from going with the state's attorney to testify against them so that they could not get out. Would your bill make it impossible for someone like that to phone a person's home who's been a victim of crime and harass them on issues like this?
Well, Representative, I'm not quite sure any bill would keep those kinds of people from doing those kinds of things. However, I think under this constitutional amendment it would be possible for a person who is harassed in that way to go into a courtroom and perhaps get an injunction, perhaps do any sort of thing that a judge could order. But I don't think this law is ever going to stop people from doing inappropriate things.
All right, thank you.
Representative Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the bill. As a former prosecutor for Champaign County, I salute the sponsor who has worked long and hard on this. I also want to extend my sympathies and prayers to the victims in this room and the victims throughout this state and around the country. I don't think anyone would wish on their worst enemy some of the things that have happened to victims over the years. I am incredibly supportive of this constitutional amendment. You know, time in and time out, you look around the room and you see conditions of bail that are set, frankly, in many cases without regard to the safety of a victim or a victim's family. How many times do you pick up a paper and read about a crime that's been committed by someone on bail? That situation is dealt with here. The ability to make a statement before sentencing seems absolutely fundamental to the very core of who we are as a people and as a democracy. And all we're doing here today is supporting those who have gone through some incredibly awful circumstances, and importantly, allowing their voices to be heard and ensuring that their voices are considered. I strongly support this and urge I vote. Thank you.
Representative Lang, to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the thoughtful comments, the hard work of the advocates in the gallery and others around the state. Let me thank my colleague, Mr. Rebelletti, for working hard to help us get this amendment in the shape it's in today. This is an important piece for our Constitution. We spend a lot of time protecting criminals based on the United States Constitution. They're entitled to those rights under the Constitution, but so too should the victims of crime. Today we take a step forward in making that happen. I strongly urge your aye votes.
Thank you for the discussion. This motion will require 71 votes. All those in favor of the adoption of House Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment number 29 signify by voting yes. Those opposed vote no. The voting is open. Have all voted to wish? Have all voted to wish? Have all voted to wish? Representative Poe, Representative Dubois. Mr. Clerk, take the record. On this motion is 116 yes, 2 no, and House Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment 29 is hereby adopted. Representative Esther Golar.